Hello and welcome to UK Gaming Network. I'm Brian, also known as UK Jane Zoidberg, and this is Worst 10, where I offer up my least favourite games to fit a selected theme. As gamers, we've all experienced that feeling of getting a new, more powerful system, and then seeing one of our favourite games get released for it. After playing though, it's all too common that that new version turns out to be not as good as the one that we already played. This is something that happened multiple times in the late 80s, as Commodore 64 owners moved on to the Amiga. In this video, I'm going to count down what I believe to be the 10 worst instances and give you a brief explanation as to why. I'll also include gameplay footage of both, just so that you can compare. As always, this is merely my opinion and just for a bit of fun. If you don't agree with my choices, that's fine. Please let me know in the comments which games you would have chosen instead. Now though, let's begin the countdown with my number 10. Truth be told, I have played Whizball on multiple systems, and I think it's an excellent game on all of them. Because I never owned a Commodore 64 though, I played the Spectrum, ST and Amiga versions all before I was able to experience the best one of them all. Peter Johnson was the programmer at Ocean responsible for the Amiga versions of Arkanoid 2 and Robocop, and he did a good job here. But it's clear from the moment that you start playing the C64 version that it's just better. In fact, Retrogaming magazine ranked it as the second best game ever made for the system. Movement is smoother, there's more variety to the enemy attack patterns, and the gameplay really shines. Even all these years later, it feels completely unique, and the co-op mode, where the second player controls the cat, is a fantastic way to play. Nobody made multi-event sports games for home computers better than Epix, and it was always the Commodore 64 version that was the best. Summer and winter games were both favourites of mine growing up, and I still like to play them today, but California Games is still the greatest of them all. It was the one game that we always played whenever I went to my friend's house who owned a Commodore, and the number of hours that we spent playing the BMX section alone is greater than many other complete games. It's not a bad game on the Amiga, but something was definitely lost in the transfer, as I found it to be less slick and the load times were horrendous. You could sit staring at a black screen for well over a minute between events, and that really broke up the flow of a multiplayer competition. Like Whizball, Boulder Dash is a game that has appeared on multiple systems, and it's always been worth playing. But it's a game that I've always associated with the Commodore 64 more than most. Even when I load modern releases, like the 40th anniversary release that came last year, I switched the visuals to match the Commodore 64 version. The only version that came out for the Amiga was Boulder Dash Construction Kit, the fourth game in the series, but on the 16-bit system it was completely overshadowed by Emerald Mine, which ironically ended up being converted to the Commodore 64 itself at a later date. I generally don't think that there's such a thing as a bad version of Boulder Dash. You're going to get enjoyment out of them all, but it will always be the C64 version that I'll play first. Clyde Radcliffe exterminates all the unfriendly, repulsive, earth-ridden slime, or creatures to you and me, was a real jewel in the Commodore 64 crown. I can remember being disappointed that I couldn't play it after seeing it in my local game store. When it finally came to a computer that I owned, some 3 years after its initial release, that was the Amiga version, which is, admittedly, a very good-looking platform game. But the gameplay is sluggish, and the annoying sound effect that they chose for your fireballs will make you want to mute the audio. Consequently, it's a game that I didn't think about for many years, until the C64 Mini launched in 2017, that is. This was one of the built-in games, and it only took a couple of plays to discover that it's a charming, fun, and technically impressive game, and I finally understood what I had been missing. Cinemaware's Defender of the Crown is a very curious case indeed. It's the only game on this list where the Commodore 64 version came out after the Amiga version, and it restored features that were left out of the original release due to time constraints put on the developer. Battles between armies are now animated with an overhead view of the field, the sword fighting during the raids is more nuanced, and catapults can now throw more than just boulders when laying siege to an opponent's castle. It makes you feel more involved in the gameplay, and the overall challenge is more satisfying. A couple of those features were restored for the CD32 sequel, but that game was also majorly simplified and overall disappointing, so the Commodore 64 version is still better. On its original 8-bit release in 1986, BMX Simulator was a smash hit at the bargain pocket money price of just £1.99. With its simple gameplay and 2-player mode, it was a game that put Codemasters' name on the map and helped them to become one of the longest running success stories in UK gaming. When it finally came to 16-bit systems 2 years later, the game was pretty much identical, with more detailed graphics thanks to the additional colours. There's still no reason to play it on your own, as the CPU opponents seem to be impervious to collisions, whereas you're made of paper and fall off if someone as much as sneezes. What destroyed it on 16-bit systems, though, was that they now expected you to pay £14.99 for the experience. That's a 700% increase, and quite frankly, there's not enough game here to justify that price. I could have probably populated this entire video with shoot-em-ups that were better on the Commodore 64 than the Amiga, but the one that has always stood out to me the most is Armalite. The gap in quality between the two versions is vast. On Commodore 64 it's slick, playable and addictive, and easily in the conversation for best game of its type on the system. Whereas on the Amiga, Arc Developments seemingly spent all their effort on the graphics and forgot about the important things like gameplay and difficulty. I'm not saying that the original game was easy, far from it, but the challenge was at least fair. In the Amiga version, the difficulty level is frankly insane. Full games can last mere seconds if you're not careful. Scrolling is too fast and the collision section too harsh, and every time you finish, you're forced to sit through an unskippable game over screen. When the intro and outro animations last longer than the game you're playing, you know you have a problem. You could actually think of Microprose Soccer as the original Sensible Soccer, as this was Chris Yates and John Hare's first attempt at making an arcade football game. The action is fast and extremely playable, with a myriad of play options at your disposal. Being able to increase the strength of the banana shots is hilarious, especially in 2-player mode, and the different weather conditions do actually change the gameplay. Sensible didn't do the Amiga version though, which was a horrible jerky mess in comparison. The little bit of enjoyment that I got out of it was the indoor soccer, but that's because it felt different to other football games. If there's a lesson here, what with Whizball's inclusion earlier in the list too, is that Sensible should definitely have converted their own games. System 3 were, with good reason, one of the most beloved names in C64 gaming, and it's probably the last Ninja series that sticks out the most from their library. It was the second game in the trilogy that was the first to come to the Amiga, with conversion duties falling to console software. Unfortunately, the step up to 16-bit made the game lose its wow factor. The movement is more sluggish, the graphics are overly detailed, and the controls far less responsive, which highlights just how difficult it was to control the main character in the first place. The only thing that survived was the excellent soundtrack, although even that was better on the Commodore 64. This is basically an entire series of games that should have just stayed on the 8-bit system. Perhaps the greatest disparity between how good the 8-bit version was and the Amiga has to be Hewson's Exelon. The original, by the great Rafael Checo, is a game that I go back to and play regularly, and it featured at number 3 on my Spectrum Top 100 last year. The C64 version is almost as good as that Spectrum version, and well worth playing if you haven't. The Amiga version, though, is an absolute travesty. It's almost like Swiss developer Linnell, who converted it, barely played the original, as none of the excellent design carried over. Some screens have completely different layouts for some reason, and it's possible to find yourself stuck in a permanent death loop. Worst of all though, the graphics are like somebody vomited colours onto the screen and said that will do. Do yourself a favour and just stick with the 8-bit original. So those are 10 Amiga games where the Commodore 64 version was better. What do you think I've left off this list that should have been included? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do a commenters edition of this video at a later date. Give us a like and subscribe if you have enjoyed this video, and join our Discord if you want to suggest any subjects for future videos. I post new Amiga videos every Friday, but if you'd like to watch them as soon as they're uploaded, please consider becoming a channel VIP for just £1.99 a month. Same price as BMX Simulator. All the details of how you can are in the video description. The full playlist of previous videos, including the first Worst 10 video from 2 weeks ago, should be on screen now if you've missed any. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, happy retro gaming everybody. Bye for now.